Hello guys and welcome to the channel. My name is Crit and today I'll be doing a review of the killing game, the adventure for SIXMOREVODKA's Degenesis role-playing game. If you watched the first review of Untitled, which was the first part of the campaign of Jehammer's Will, then you're already familiar with Degenesis and the initial part of the campaign. And the killing game picks up where Untitled finished and moves the players and the action to a new location, to Southern Franca and the city of Toulon. The killing game is a vast improvement on the first part, the Untitled, not only in size, as it is about double the size of Untitled, coming in at 200 plus pages, and it also gives you a lot more detail about Southern Franca and the surrounding areas. The adventure of the killing game is about the same size or maybe slightly longer than Untitled, but the vast amount of character information, details about surrounding locations and adventure hooks make the killing game a vastly superior product and a major improvement on the first part. The book is divided into 4 chapters, as was Untitled, with the first chapter starting off with a description of Toulon and its surroundings. So not only do you get stats and information about Toulon, but also Montpellier, Perpignan and Toulouse are detailed. I think the most valuable part in this book is actually a description of the Rhone Swamp area, where you can take the players to look for artifacts, battle with the Ferromancers, and to try to find out about the different mysteries which surround the city of Toulon, and overall to get to know this part of Southern Franca. On the inside of the front cover there is a very nice map of Southern Franca and surrounding areas. So not only is the part of Southern Franca described, but you have here parts of Hispania, some part of the Mediterranean, and also some details about Helvetica. The first chapter gives you kind of an overview of all of these different locations, and as I said, some statistics about the people living in these major cities. And one of the best parts is the description of the Rhone Swamp area, where you have information about the different swamp zones, what are the effects when you're traveling through these swamp zones and spore fields, what are the Ferromancer drones, how they behave, what are the mask bearers, and different overall information about the drone and Ferromancer activity in the area. So in that sense, this book is very useful for anyone planning to organize any adventures in Southern Franca. The book goes into more detail on Toulon itself and describes in detail the different parts of the city, different locations there, and what are the differences between the tech levels and appearances of the different areas. On the inside of the back cover there's again a nice map of Toulon with a list of different locations, and you have here the different areas of the city where you can find different cults and their activities. The overall description or overall idea of Toulon is that it's a Neo-Libyan held city, which previously was a center of chronicler activity, where they were involved in looking for artifacts in the Rhone swamps, and now the Neo-Libyans have taken over from the chroniclers, leaving the scrappers, the Iron Brothers, who run the scrapping operations in Toulon, in a situation where they are selling most of their things to the Neo-Libyans, and the judges and chroniclers of Justinian are annoyed with the fact and are planning a comeback in the city. The second part of the book goes on to describe the different characters and list the different power blocks, different factions operating in Toulon, and in the same model as in the Blood, they give you a very good level of detail about the different characters and their motivations, how to roleplay them, and also a complete list of their stats and potentials. So here you have listed the Neo-Libyan faction and their allies, the rulers of Toulon, starting with Hamza Abu Bakr III, the ruler of the city, and his relatives, how they support his reign in the city, and also the African scourgers, who are essentially maintaining order in Toulon. Then you have the Iron Brothers, who make up the antagonist faction in the actual adventure, and there are some nice ties to previous adventures, as here we have Eisenhower, who is the brother of the blacksmith mentioned in Embargo. If you have ran Embargo, then it's possible that there are some connections which will be rewarded when going into the killing game. For example, my players had killed blacksmith in the Embargo and now have to deal with his brother, who is of course justifiably annoyed at the loss of his brother. Then there is the Commando Requiem, which is the chronicler judge alliance trying to take over Toulon from the Neo-Libyans, and a major player in the adventure, the killing game itself. And then we have the Apocalyptics, who also play an important part in the adventure, and their two factions, the Firebirds and then the Black Flock, who operate in the Mediterranean. Other factions also involved. Here's the Cauldron, and this is kind of a collection of different people in Toulon who either work for the resistance, supporting Francan attempts at reclaiming southern Franca from the Fermancers, or some other characters who are relevant to the actual adventure and just have been grouped in the same faction. So overall, I'd say that the second part continues very well the good quality of NPC detailing as visible already in the Blood, and gives you good tools for playing these NPCs and using them in the adventure of the killing game. But next, let's go into the adventure of the killing game itself. So the killing game, the adventure itself, is the second part of the Degenesis trilogy. As I mentioned in the first review of In the Blood, there are some things, some slight problems in connecting this trilogy together and holding it together as a coherent campaign. In the beginning of the adventure and in the beginning of the book, you're recommended that you bring the characters into Toulon before the actual adventure begins, as to make Toulon more familiar to them and for them to have some emotional stake in the events of the adventure. So in order to do that, I ran a small adventure in the Rhone swamps before bringing them or returning them back to Toulon, where they could deal with the aftermath of their own small adventure and then go into the events of the killing game. So in the course of Degenesis, you are really recommended to create some bridging adventures to connect the different parts and to make it overall a more cohesive experience. At the end of the killing game, then you have the option of running Rising Ravens, which is a PDF-only adventure available on the SIXMOREVODKA website, and it involves a continuation of the events of the killing game in a minor way, where you can explore what happens when apocalyptics are trying to move in to Toulon, which they now see as an open city after the events of the killing game. And then the adventure will conclude in the Black Atlantic, and again it's recommended to have a small lead-in to the Black Atlantic after Rising Ravens in order to make some characters and the surrounding area of the Black Atlantic more familiar to your group. So as I'm making this video, my group is actually going through the killing game. They have pretty much finished the first part, the first day of the adventure, and they have had great fun during the adventure, and of course they have taken matters into their own hands and created something of their own during this adventure. So the adventure of the killing game actually revolves around a attempted takeover of Toulon, a coup, where the Iron Brothers and a group of chroniclers and judges are making an effort to destroy the Neo-Libyan rulers of the city and to take over and reestablish their joint rule in Toulon. The actual adventure starts with a series of explosions which rock Toulon and take out parts of the opposition and lead into Iron Brother activity, where they are looking to capture the leaders of the Neo-Libyans and use them for their own purposes. The beginning of the adventure also has a short prologue where you can introduce some small events, plots, which kind of foreshadow the actual happenings during the adventure, and you have the possibility of using these to introduce some people in Toulon, or at least get an idea of the different factions who are involved. I found some of these scenes in the prologue a bit difficult to use because they basically involve placing your characters in different locations without giving a good reason behind why they would be there, and you would basically have to lead them there by hand and come up with a good reason to have them there. And even having done that, I don't think that these small scenes are super important for the course of the adventure, but of course they give some additional background and foreshadow what is going to happen. So the killing game is very much an action-packed adventure where there's basically 72 hours for the characters to experience this attempted coup in Toulon and to oppose the Iron Brothers and their allies, the chroniclers and the judges. In the beginning, it's very unclear to the players what is actually happening, so it's very expected there is a moment of unclarity when they're trying to find what is happening in the city when the coup is happening, and they see masses of Iron Brothers rampaging through the streets and attacking the palace of Hamza, the ruling Neo-Libyan. So the first scenes of the adventure basically give the players free hands to look into matters how they personally see best and to find out what's going on. Some of the first events in the adventure and the division of, for example, experience points on how the players deal with them can be a bit difficult to organize, or at least my players felt that it's not too easy to try to save all the possible persons listed in these events, as they don't know what is going on, and it's a bit difficult to establish motivation why they would rush into areas filled with Iron Brothers who are rampaging through the city as they hear gunfire and explosions coming from the palace. So it very well might be that your players won't rush headlong into certain locations, as combat in Degenesis can be short and deadly. The adventure continues with the players trying to find the motivations behind this coup attempt and try to save as many people as possible while bringing reinforcements to the city and assisting Hamza and the Neo-Libyans in surviving the attack. I'm not going to go into details of all the events, but I will just discuss some plot points which occur during this adventure. One of the connecting events or connecting personalities here again is Decoy 5, the chronicler also present in Blood, who is here again introduced and brought to this adventure to offer some continuation, and I think he is a welcome NPC to create a bit of context and continuation from the previous adventure. The other NPCs, and especially the character of Rattler, the apocalyptic, who comes in quite late in the adventure, is a bit more problematic, as there is very little background given on him. He is basically a tabula rasa person who has forgotten his previous existence and now exists as an instrument of vengeance, attacking his enemies in Toulon. As Rattler makes his way through Toulon, as a GM, you are not given a really good, let's say, justification of his motivation, his background, but he kind of comes and goes through the adventure, which I find a bit jarring, as the motivations and backgrounds of all the other characters are better explained. And in the finale of the adventure, there is also a short epilogue, which I think is also a bit disappointing and problematic for the characters, as it is essentially a bait and switch, where they are promised that there might be good opportunities for finding a cache of UEO supplies underneath the city, but as they go into the actual location, they will discover a major NPC who has already taken all the supplies and ferried them elsewhere. Of course, this might serve as a good continuation of the adventure and lead into another adventure in the Rome swamps, but as a technique in storytelling and offering something to characters and then taking away at the last moment, I found it disappointing, and I can already see that my players will probably not be very happy about it. Thinking about the killing game as a whole, the adventure is really action-packed. There's a lot of conflict, a lot of opportunities for combat, and the players really have to manage their ammo, their supplies, their health, their ego points in order to make through the 72 hours of the adventure. So this is a really big difference as to the events of In the Blood, which was more of a detective story and finding out something through deducing and searching for clues, whereas in the killing game you are very much involved in combat while you are doing also some detective work to find out who are behind the coup attempt in Toulon. So, to give you an overall review of the Killing Game and some final conclusions, I think the book is a very nice continuation of the In the Blood first part of Jehan's Will trilogy. It does have some problems, as mentioned in the Blood, that there is a certain amount of railroading and a very tightly plotted adventure where you always don't have a lot of different options on how you want things to proceed. The events unfold pretty much as they have been written, and certain things are just unavoidable, even if you'd like to save a certain person or change the course of events. Of course, some possibilities have been mentioned, but if you don't like adventures where your players cannot really change the outcome, but you are more or less participants in somebody else's story, then the Killing Game might not be completely for you. I have found that the adventure is well written, the NPCs are interesting, and the plot is engaging, but in order to make it your own, there is some amount of work that you have to do. Then, as in the Blood, there is some amount of work to engage the players in the larger campaign and tie up the different parts of Jehan's Will together. At the end of this adventure, you are again given one piece of Jehan's Will, but there is still not a lot of explanation on how to combine the different parts and how they will come together in the last part, the Black Atlantic. So if you consider this to be a campaign, then you have to be prepared to put the campaign together and to give the players a justification for holding on to the pieces of Jehan's Will. The Killing Game is available as a free download at the Degenesis.com site and also available at the SIXMOREVODKA store. I recommend that you check out the PDF for the very generous price of free, and if you like these high production qualities, you like your post-apocalyptic adventures, then I do recommend that you buy this book from SIXMOREVODKA and check what Degenesis is about. This is a very well produced piece of role-playing game adventure, sourcebook and setting, and despite some flaws, I do recommend that you look into it and see what Degenesis is about. If you like this video, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and later on check out the last part of the campaign, a review of the Black Atlantic.